Welcome to Overcoming Distractions, the podcast, how to stay focused in business and in life. Each week, we interview successful people and experts in a variety of industries, all in an effort to keep you focused on growing your business and career and thriving in life. Distractions are the enemy of greatness, so let's minimize those distractions and set your sights on success. Our topics include money, productivity, developing routines and new habits, and we also have episodes on how to thrive in this world if you're an adult with ADHD. Stay focused, people, and let's get moving. Here's our host, author of the popular book, Overcoming Distractions, Dave Greenwood.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Overcoming Distractions, and this is an episode that I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and it's on the topic of Imposter Syndrome. Now that is just briefly, and our guest is going to get more into this, is just a feeling of maybe not thinking you're qualified to be in the place you are. And we talk about examples in the podcast, but maybe as the name implies, you're being an imposter. So maybe it's a career that you don't think you're qualified for, and there's other people around you that you think, or your mind is telling you that other people are better, in other instances. And it's a lot of people with ADHD and without ADHD who suffer from this mindset. So we're going to talk to Jen Koken today, and she works with people and coaches people around the subject of imposter syndrome. She's a well-known keynote speaker in this area, and I can tell you, because I'm recording this introduction after we did our podcast, is that she was a wealth of information as well as positive thoughts on how to work around your imposter syndrome. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how do we recognize this. We're going to talk about how to work through it. We're going to talk about some regular activities that help us stay positive. And then, of course, like every podcast, she's going to give us our top tips for working through it. As I always ask you, if you like what you hear and you like the expert guests that I have on, I'd love for you to hop on iTunes and just give it a quick review and give me your positive thoughts. That helps other people determine whether they want to listen to the podcast. So I would greatly appreciate that. And if you want to learn more about me, you can find me at overcomingdistractions.com. So let's go talk to Jen Koken about imposter syndrome. All right, welcome back to Overcoming Distractions. And as I always say, thank you for joining me. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our expert guests. And I always love to pick our guests carefully because I want you to listen to this podcast and at the end, walk away with something that you can implement in your daily lives. And there is one topic that I've been wanting to deal with since I started this podcast, and it's imposter syndrome. I know a little bit about it. But I brought in the expert today, and her name is Jen Koken. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I've been wanting to cover this for a while. I've actually asked a couple people to come on, and they have said no for whatever reason. I don't know why. So I'm
Was
glad.
it something you said? Kidding.
I'm sure it's probably the bald spot in my head, which you can see and nobody else can. So I don't know, maybe
What bald spot? What are you talking about?
I have no idea. So some people just, or I've had people actually just not show up for a podcast. So whatever.
So unprofessional.
Exactly. So anywho, but you're a professional, and that's why I'm glad you're here today, because I really want to tackle this subject. So, and as people have heard me say before, I do a very poor job at introducing people. So take a minute or so and tell people who you are, your business, your coaching, who you work with, that type of thing.
Great. So my name's Jen Koken, and I work with, I call myself the executive coach for badass boss ladies who are ready to grab snarling dogs by the ears, smash obstacles and jump over hurdles. And I've been beating down BS with a velvet sledgehammer for over 20 years. So I'm an executive coach, predominantly women. Just happens to be my passion and my heart to make sure that women speak up in boardrooms and at every level of their leadership. But I do coach men as well. And I was a stand-up comic for a long time. And so that was always a side hustle. So everything has to be playful, has to be humorous, because if we can't laugh at ourselves, I think all is lost. And I also do keynote speaking and training. And I've written 2 books. My first book is called When I Die, Take My Panties, Turning Your Darkest Moments into Your Greatest Gifts. And that's available on Amazon and all bookstores. But no one's walking into a bookstore these days. So get it on Amazon.
No, and as I've said the past few podcasts, for those who are listening to this podcast in the year 2024, this was recorded during the coronavirus COVID-19 crisis quarantine. So if I know a lot of people go back and listen to past podcasts, but just for people's reference, that you're right, bookstores, at least in Massachusetts, are just starting to open now. So hopefully we can get our hands on some physical books for a change. So I like I said, I want to tackle this because I know personally I've probably felt this in my life. I owned a restaurant outside of Boston years ago, and it was a franchise, and the company did not do a good job in marketing or public relations. We were they dusted off the old special signs once a month and hung them and took them down and put the next one up. So we were out there as franchisees to grow our own business, so to speak. So I learned how to use public relations. So, and I think I was pretty good at it. Fast forward to when I finally decided I could not work in the restaurant business anymore. I got a job at Special Olympics as the public relations director. Never sat one day in a classroom for PR. And I always felt that here's people that went and got bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees in communications, and they're working in PR, and they're in these big office buildings. And here I am at Special Olympics, surrounded by TV cameras, which people who are all dressed up with their nice degrees and everything else were drooling over, okay? And I always thought in the back of my head, something is telling me I don't belong here. So that's where I'm coming from in this, because I know I've experienced it. So, but for those who are listening, as we talk about this, can you just tell people what imposter syndrome is?
Yeah, absolutely. So calling it a syndrome is a misnomer. Now, let me just back up and say I'm not a psychologist, but I've been researching this for a while now. But a syndrome is something you'd be diagnosed with.
Yeah.
So it could be called the imposter phenomenon. And what I have found, and it was initially, the phrase was coined back in 1978 by 2 female researchers by the names of Clancy and Imes. And what they said is it's usually the experience of feeling like a fraud by very high achieving individuals. Back then, they thought women had it more than men because women have less testosterone, and testosterone was always looked at as the confidence hormone. Yeah. Come to find out, women and men experience it equally. Women tend to talk about it more than men because we tend to talk about our feelings more. Fast forward, Dr. Valerie Young, back in the, I believe the 90s, was doing her PhD on imposter syndrome, and then came out with a book that looked at imposter syndrome and categorized it into 5 particular categories, because often people, well, I don't ever feel like a fraud. They don't equate that with imposter syndrome. But if you've ever doubted yourself, questioned yourself, wondered why you were there, if you're a perfectionist, if you don't like asking for help because you think it makes you look weak, if you feel like you got to know all the answers and have a lot of letters after your name, all those things are hallmarks of imposter syndrome. So I feel like she did a TED Talk on it, and I feel like she made it much more edible for the general public, to be able to consume it, to be able to understand it. What I have also found in working with my clients, which is why I got interested in this, is that Imposter syndrome happens for everybody, and it's a natural human phenomenon. So our brain, the amygdala in our brain, which is the reptilian part of our brain, which governs our fight, flight, or freeze, it's there to determine threat. And it's there to keep the thing it's a brain of alive, meaning you and me. Your brain's there to keep you alive, mine's to keep me alive. So it's always looking at a threat, but it doesn't know the difference between a real threat and an imagined threat. It's always the same level of threat. So you're in a room with these PhDs or bachelors with people with all these, initials after their name. And you're like, who am I to be here? Because your brain is thinking it's threatened at that time. And for each one of us, there's a point of origin. There's a moment as kids where we concluded we didn't have what it took, or we needed to do everything perfect. Case in point, I was working with a client. She's 9. She has been getting, what grade are you in? 4th grade, right? When you're 9. So she's getting all A's in school, but she comes home with 1 C. And her dad goes, well, what's with the C? And she says, what's the problem? It's average. And he goes, write me a 1,500 word essay on average. And right there, boom, she said to herself, everything's got to be perfect. And now she's this perfectionist with high standards for herself and others, but always feeling like a fraud, because if she can't get it perfect, it's not good enough.
Well, see, that's, first of all, the only letters after my name are like D's and F's. I can tell you that for grace. So those are the only letters that came after my name. But you bring up a point, which, again, I've talked about this before. And if anybody didn't do well in school, especially those with ADHD, they know the bad report cards, like you mentioned, the comments on the report cards. If you grew up in my era, which was the mid to late 60s, going to school in the 70s, they didn't have a very good understanding of ADHD, kids with different brains, kids who maybe just learned a little differently. So we got crushed on our report cards. We got the D's, we got the F's, we got, Dave needs to try harder. And to your point, that over time, when they don't know how to deal with a student like that, just gnaws away at them, and it sets them up for years and years of self-doubt. And again, I'm far from a doctor or psychologist as well, but that's my opinion.
Well, I mean, after 20 years of coaching people, I think you're absolutely dead on, because what happens in the first moment that happens with those grades, or Dave needs to try harder, and you're thinking to yourself, I'm doing the best that I can. It's not that I've tried as hard as I can, and you're telling me I need to try harder, and I don't even know how to get to that. There's a moment where you say to yourself, well, I'm just a dummy. My dad was dyslexic. Same thing happened to him. He decided for himself he was a dummy. That moment, you're creating a neuronal pathway in your brain. And then every time you hear that, it's ingrained, it's ingrained, it's ingrained, it's ingrained. So one of the takeaways for people that listen to your podcast is, quite honestly, to notice the moments you're doubting yourself, or have that thought like, I feel so stupid, or I always talk about, there's a line, and that line is being present. There's below the line, which is reactive, and then above the line, which is your opportunity to create. Well, all those automatic emotions, moods, attitudes, which we automatically generate because we're human beings, sadness, embarrassment, frustration that I could hear in your voice as you were talking about these report cards and the D's and F's, all that's automatic. Yeah. If you can notice it and go, oh, got it, I'm frustrated right now. I'm feeling frustrated rather than I am frustrated, or, oh, I was just questioning myself, then you're Dave and you're feeling frustrated, and all of a sudden you're present. And when we're present, we can have a presence of mind, body, spirit, soul, meaning we can think calmly, we feel calm, we can do good, and we can fulfill on whatever we're here to fulfill on if we're present. The key is to start noticing the trigger wires of what causes you to doubt yourself, the fear. One thing you said in the beginning, when you were talking about your experience of going from, having real world experience, by the way, doing PR and branding for your restaurant, which all those kids with the fancy PhDs and MDs and BAs and BSs and all that stuff, they don't know what it's really like in the trenches. I'll tell you from experience, having gone to college for political campaign management, running my first campaign was nothing like the theory I learned in the classroom. Yeah. Nothing beats experience.
Yeah.
But we don't know that because we're comparing, and that's the other piece about being a human being. We're always comparing ourselves to other people and generally finding ourselves coming up short. The human brain has 50 to 60,000 thoughts a day.
Yeah.
80 to 85% are negative.
Yeah. But you're right, is that some people, I think, in my experience, do have a hard time equating that or telling themselves that. Like, you're right. I had an experience early on in an organization where there was misappropriation of funds, and I found myself coming out of courtrooms to massive TV cameras and microphones and flash bulbs, and like you said, like the political arena and all that stuff, and being on the news for days, where somebody, no disrespect, so don't take it that way, but somebody who might have gotten an English degree and went to work for a PR firm did not have that experience of being in the trenches and being scared to death you were going to say something stupid into a live TV camera and all that. But I think my point is that sometimes we don't equate the learned experience with the piece of paper on our wall. And that's a hard thing for somebody young to get comfortable with and kind of rework their mindset, correct?
Yeah, it is. And I think the key is to notice the brain pattern and interrupt it. It becomes a game, it just becomes a game of noticing it, interrupting it, noticing it, because we all have those limiting beliefs about ourselves. We all have some degree of imposter syndrome. It would be weird if we went around introducing ourselves like that. Dave, hi, how you doing? I think I'm no good. I think I'm a dummy. Nice to meet you. Hi, how are you? I don't think people like me. We're not going to introduce ourselves that way. We're thinking that, but we do that with our energy as we're approaching people, which can push people away, right? And I think the other thing that's important that I have found through talking with people is imposter syndrome is also a good indicator that you're in your stretch zone.
All right, so explain that.
Yeah. So if you think about a rubber band, if a rubber band is just sitting on my hand, it's not doing its job. It's just kind of sitting there. If it's stretched around a stack of papers or the rubber band ball that many of us have in our closet that we never use, it's quote unquote doing its job. You just don't want to stretch it so far that it's broken. So if you think about it as human beings, there's our comfort zone, our stretch zone, and our panic zone. When we're comfortable, we're not learning and growing. We get complacent. Maybe we've been in the same job for 20 years and it's just what we do because we show up to work and it's the job we do. And for whatever reason, we don't think we can fulfill the dreams we once had. You walking in front of those cameras, that was definitely your stretch zone, maybe on the edge of your panic zone when you were about to break. Mm-hmm. But it's in those moments when we're in our stretch zone that we will question ourselves because we're stretched.
Yeah.
If we start to recognize the questioning or the imposter syndrome as an indicator that we're stretching ourselves, then we can reframe those thoughts in our head from negative to positive. Okay, I must be stretching myself right now. How am I stretching myself? What skills might I need? What new abilities might I need? Who can I call so that I do feel more comfortable fully immersing myself and owning the stretch zone? I'll tell you, anytime I give a keynote, if I'm not nervous and freaked out, I worry because that means that I'm not going to give a great talk. Because my commitment, anytime I go give a talk or training, is to transform the room, every person in the room. And I put myself on the hook for that on purpose.
But how does it feel when you nail that keynote?
Well, it's so interesting that you say that because other people would say you nailed it. And I'm like, yeah, but there was this. And that's my own imposter syndrome kicking in because my flavor of imposter syndrome is perfectionism.
That could be the title of your next book. Yeah, but.
Yeah, it could be, or it could be I'm number two, because where that came about was my own origin story. I was 7. Me and my best friend liked the same boy in school, and he liked her, not me. And when you're 7, what do? You chase the boy around the schoolyard and you try to kiss him. You push him down, you try to kiss him. And we pushed him down and he looked at Michelle and kissed her, and she was blonde, petite, blue-eyed, and perky. And I was a very, tall, chunky, dark-haired, brown-eyed girl. And he looked at me and went, "Ew." And I went, "I'm never going to be perky, blue-eyed, and blonde-haired, but I guess I'll just be the funny sidekick." and I'll just be number two. So those times when I step into being the one or step into being the one in front of the room, I am like perspiring, a little nauseous, sweaty palms, dry throat, the whole bit.
Wow. Well, they always say people who do speak for a living, even if they're not nervous, that something is a little wrong. So yeah. How do we become? There's one thing that I failed to put in my book, Overcoming Distractions, and it's a little more detail on self-awareness, because I think that's a huge piece. So how can people be a little more self-aware of the imposter syndrome in them? How can they kind of dial in on it?
Yeah, well, I would say two things. One is there's a webinar on my website that people can get and download and watch. That's a whole 45 minutes where I take people through a slide deck. They can start to see themselves, and a meditation. There's also a quiz on if you go to jenkokenquiz.com, they can take a quiz on imposter syndrome. That's probably the easiest thing to do and kind of begin to understand and identify. So I think number one, it's like being an alcoholic. First, admit you have a problem. I think the first thing is being able to name it. Being able to name, oh, you mean when I don't delegate? That's actually part of imposter syndrome. When I need to learn more and more and more before I'll speak up at a meeting, that's part of imposter syndrome. Yeah. So get your unique flavor. And then once you get it, I would think about not just the thoughts, but where you feel it in your body, because each of us experiences it different ways. When I take people through a guided meditation, I will often say, start thinking about the last time you felt afraid, the last time you questioned yourself, the last time you felt fear. Where do you feel it? Is it in your gut? Is it in your throat? Is it tense neck? So that you can begin to identify, oh, my neck is tense. I wonder if I was just having some thoughts that were kind of like imposter syndrome. What were the thoughts? Because I think most of us walk around in life not present. And the key thing is to get present. When you start being able to go into your body and name the emotion, the mood, the physical sensation, and be able to name the thoughts, that allows you to be present. And as I said, have presence. When you have presence, then you can choose how you're going to respond. Then there's a creative opportunity to be able to say, okay, right now I'm doubting myself, and I notice these thoughts that I'm having. I'm going to be courageous in this moment, and I'm going to speak up. There used to be a time where, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Ohio. I know you're outside of Boston. Grew up and so you were very nice. If you didn't have something good to say, don't say it. So when people would say, how are you? You just said, fine. And I'll never forget the time when I had gone through my own journey of personal growth and development, and imagined a tube of toothpaste squeezing the words out of my mouth, because that was the only way. I'm a very visual person, that I could start to let people know how I actually was, and started to consider that when people said, how are you? They actually wanted to know.
They actually see, in Boston, when somebody cuts us off, we just flip them off. That's what goes on here.
It's sign language in Boston.
There's a term for that. So
love it.
So is it common to, I guess, self-sabotage?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. You get to that point where you're almost like really comfortable with who you are, and then boom.
Yeah, I think, it's like, how good can you stand it? How good can you stand it? Or you just throw a wrench in the works right when things are good. And that's often why people recommend starting a gratitude journal. At the end of the day, just writing 5 things down you're grateful for, because again, 80 to 85% of our thoughts are negative. Yeah. And so it might not be, but I'm not thinking negatively about my relationship or my job, but you have those moments where you're like, crap, I forgot this thing. I'm so stupid. Or here's another hallmark of imposter syndrome, which would probably folks who listen to this, particularly with ADHD, could resonate with. If they don't feel like they're good at something, that's actually a hallmark of imposter syndrome, especially if you don't feel like you can get it, if it doesn't come easy to you.
Well, I think, I'm going to maybe go against the grain here, but one of and I'm probably going off track, but that's what we do here, is that I'm a firm believer is that if you're not good at something and you've kind of demonstrated you're not good at it, then, I think people should focus on their strengths. I've just laid down the math thing. I suck at math. I knew enough to run my numbers in the restaurant. I knew my gross margin. I knew my payroll. Okay. But helping a 14-year-old with math is like pulling my fingernails out. I can't take it. Okay. So I've learned over the years that I guess to help my own mental health or mental well-being or positivity, that I like to do things that I'm good at. So it's not to say that I can't do things that I'm bad at. Another example, I studied karate and other martial arts for a long time. I always told myself I was really bad at ground fighting. I was good on my feet with, kicks and punches, but if I ever got on the ground, I'd be dead. Well, then we started learning ground fighting in the school I went to, and the sensei there said, Dave's the best ground fighter we have. I've been telling myself that for years, that if I got on the ground, I was going to get my ass kicked. So there's things like that as well. I think maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, is that I don't want to learn math. So I'm done with it,
Yeah, no, I think that's totally cool. I think what I'm saying is there's things that people don't try at all because they don't think they'll be good at it. I think the distinction, what you're saying is, I know I suck at math. I'm not going to do that. There's a lot of things I suck at that I'm not, or a lot of things that I don't ever want to know. I don't want to know how to fly a plane. I don't want to fly a twin engine plane. I'm not interested. I don't want to learn Chinese, although maybe I should, because then I'll know what some of the things are that are being out there that are made in China. I don't know, I'm going off on a tangent here, but there's certain things that I am just not good at. Like, I know I have an entrepreneur's mind. I know I'm at my happiest if you came to me and said, Jen, look, I have this idea and I have a painting that Blue Man Group made for me, and I have a microphone and I have my AirPods. And what I want to do is we're going to build a movement that's going to be a conference on a ship with all people that have ADHD and make sure that they have enough things to do while we're on the ship. And here's my intention. Can you go create that for me? I'd be like, sure, I'd be happy to do that. Once that thing is up and running though, I don't want to run it. I hate day-to-day running of anything. Yeah. I'm a big thinker. And so I've had to overcome that running my own company as I'm growing to hire the right people in the right place. Mostly because I'm a solopreneur. Mostly, I have a team of people that are consultants, et cetera. But I'm with you. If you're not good at something, or you don't like it, don't do it. Oftentimes what happens though is we get pigeonholed into our zone of what we're good at rather than our zone of genius. And we're happiest when we're in our zone of genius, not our zone of competence. And that's from a great book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, which is a great book.
Okay, cool. The Big Leap. I would imagine that if you're forced to do math or forced to do whatever, that can contribute to a negative mindset as well.
I think, yes. And I think if you're forced to, you always recognize that we have agency over ourselves and we can always say no. And I think too often, I grew up being a people pleaser because I was the trying to make everybody happy in my household. And doing what mom wanted and doing what dad wanted and that sort of thing. But how that impacted me growing up is a lot of times I didn't know what I wanted because I was such a chameleon trying to please other people. So I've had to learn to say no to things. So I think number one is recognizing you have agency over your yes, and yes is a complete statement and no is a complete statement. And then if you're going to say yes, then make sure your frame of mind is one that you're really there to contribute rather than doing it, kicking and fighting, being dragged along.
I think learning how to say no is a whole entire separate podcast episode, in my opinion. I mean, it's so many people struggle with that, and then they set themselves up for failure and disappointment and thinking that, disappointing others. And so we'll have to talk about that. So so talk to people about what kind of regular activities and things they can do to, help us stay positive.
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. I think number one, meditation, which I know a lot of people have gotten into, but you don't have to think about meditation as you got to sit for 45 minutes. Meditation can be a meditative walk. many people are getting, a lot more people are getting outside now, and you do a 5 senses meditation. What are 5 things that you see? 4 things that you can feel, like maybe as you're walking, you feel your feet on the ground, or you feel the air or the sun on your back. So let's see, 5 things you see, 4 things you feel, 3 things you hear, different sounds, 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you taste. And hopefully you're sucking on a mint or something like that. And it's not, day old cheese that you just, blue cheese that you just ate. It's a pleasant taste in your mouth. But that can be a meditation. I think the key is to turn off our brain for at least 5 minutes in the morning and at night. I think something else is to put your phone in another room, because there's so much news right now, and we want to stay connected because we can't, again, because this podcast right now is being recorded during time of COVID. We're not out with people. But I also think an obsession with the news is a bad thing. Your brain will imprint your last thoughts before you go to sleep. Dr. Wayne Dyer talks about this. So having a positive mindset before you go to sleep. And if people believe in God or believe in a higher power, saying a prayer before you go to sleep to bless yourself and the people around you, thinking about 5 things you're grateful for. If you're not a journaler, don't worry about it. Think about it. Yeah. But journaling, believe it or not, NASA, who's done a lot of research about self-isolation and staying positive, says that journaling is the number 1 thing that keeps people in a positive mind space. And then as it relates to imposter syndrome, I think maybe you do an imposter syndrome journal where you begin to just make note where you have those thoughts of feeling, questioning yourself, and what's the emotion? Are you embarrassed? Are you, what's the body sensation? Is it in your gut? Those kinds of things. So you can begin to notice the pattern. You can begin to understand what triggers it. Because if you know what triggers it, then in that moment you have agency over your response to it, your ability to respond, responsibility. So you can be present and then choose how you're going to respond to the situation. And in the moment that something gets triggered or self-sabotage, or someone makes a request of you or asks you to do something you don't want to do, you can say no if you're present. I'm just going to say no. You don't even have to explain why, which we love to do. But no is a complete statement, as one of my mentors said to me.
And I know looking inward can be kind of a struggle for some people. So.
Yeah, I think some people feel like they feel like there's some hidden demon they're going to find inside. But I'll tell you, Dave, I've been coaching people over 20 years. I've coached upwards of 10,000 people, because I used to coach for really the leader in the personal growth and development arena. And there's nothing I haven't heard. And what's key is humans have the same experiences. I mean, outside of something like murder or rape, but even 1 in 4 women have been sexually assaulted. So it's way more common than we think. We just don't talk about it. And when we keep those conversations inside, it gets louder and louder and louder. And I always say your own head is a bad neighborhood to go in. So being in communication with a friend, a confidant, somebody you trust, is really important, which is why I tell everybody to get a coach. Because I think, and some people have therapists. The difference is therapists work with you on what the past has been and how it impacts you today. And coaches are really looking to the future and helping you achieve your goals and figuring out the gap in skills, abilities to be able to get there, and then holding you to account. I just think it's important to have somebody to speak to about what's going on in your head, so you don't stay in that bad neighborhood by yourself.
Yeah, and I would say being honest with yourself and whoever you're speaking with, whether it's a therapist or a professional coach like yourself, is probably crucial.
Yeah. And, sometimes I have a coach. I coach other people, but I have a coach, and he will sometimes say to me, you know what, Jen, can I be blunt with you? And I said, yeah. He goes, I think you're full of crap. I rely on people like that. Yeah. And I have a certain close-knit circle of friends who we will do that for each other, because sometimes we don't even know we're being dishonest with ourselves. And it's not dishonesty as it is much inauthenticity. We're just not being true to who we really are. And in my own personal belief system, I think we're all made in God's image. That means we're all good to our core. We all have a purpose and a gift to be here. Our moment is to let that shine and not let our doubts, our experience of being a fraud, our questions about ourselves get in the way of us fulfilling the gift we came here to give to the rest of the world. And maybe that gift is being a great dad or a great mom. Maybe that's the thing that is your biggest gift. And you know what? Please don't downplay that. I was talking to a woman yesterday who's very accomplished. And she said, she's about to turn 60. Looking back at my life, I found that being a mom for these last 32 years was the most fulfilling thing I did. And she kind of downplayed it. And I said, wait. You've been a mom for 32 years to 3 kids. That's huge. That's a huge accomplishment. Or a dad, a grandparent. And maybe you don't have your own children, but you've been a mom to a niece, a nephew, a godson, whatever it is. I think we discredit ourselves for the good people that we are and the positivity we bring to the world and the gifts that we have, because our eyes are so much on this big prize that we miss the nuggets of gold. And I guess the other tip I'd give to your listeners is start listening for the nuggets of gold and start looking for the nuggets of gold within yourself.
Yeah. I interviewed a gentleman a while ago for a book that I've struggled to get done, my second one, because of various scheduling issues. But we spent a lot of time on the Ikigai, which I thought was an interesting concept that a lot of people haven't heard of. But it's this kind of looking inward and not so much the meaning of life, but kind of, why am I here?
The reason for being. In Japanese culture, it was attributed, their longevity of life, which is 83.7 years or something like that, was attributed to their diet. When in fact, it's their Ikigai, which is the intersection between what you're good at, what you're passionate about, what the world needs, and by the way, what you can get paid for, which is important, and when you can find that little intersection, then that's your zone of genius too.
Yeah.
Then you're really feeling fulfilled. I love that. I learned that term through using the Calm app for meditating.
Yeah. No, I've got a couple books on it. I interviewed a guy who actually is a professor at, his name escapes me at the moment, so I apologize if you're listening. But he's written a book on the Ikigai and really studied it for decades. So
really,
yeah. So
if you remember to send me the name of that book, I'd love to know.
Yes, I will.
Sorry, people listening.
Yes, sorry. and sorry. Gordon
I'm
Matthews.
the only one who gets it.
That's his name, Gordon Matthews. He was so. All right, let's wrap up by giving people your top tips for working through imposter syndrome.
Okay. Tip number 1, start noticing when you're questioning yourself, when you feel like you don't belong someplace. Start noticing what those aspects of imposter syndrome are. Number 2, notice where you feel it in your body. Number 3, notice the emotions. And then begin to, number 4, discern the triggers. Why is it getting triggered? What instances am I in? And number 5, start breathing into it. When you have that experience, start breathing into it so that you can be present and choose how you're going to respond in the next moment, against a background of recognizing when you experience imposter syndrome, you're in your stretch zone. And then I would also say, because I'm sure you're going to ask me this, where people can get a hold of me and that sort of thing. So you can, my website's jenkoken.com, but I would invite people to take this quiz. It's free to take it, jenkokenquiz.com, JENCOKEN quiz, QUIZ.
I'll spell check it. I'll spell check it in the show notes.
Thank you. But then you can go there and take a quiz and get to see your own flavor, and some of the questions go through some things you might not have thought about that are actually hallmarks of imposter syndrome. And then I think the other piece is it's never going to go away. It's not like one day it's going to disappear, because it's there to make sure that you're not threatened. And it's also there to make sure you're in your stretch zone. So welcome it like a little warm sweater that your granny made you when you were a little child. When you were a wee bairn, greet it like a little sweater that your granny made you when you were a wee bairn.
It's funny. I stumbled on something, the opposite of imposter syndrome, and I was doing a little research, which is called the Dunning-Kruger Effect, which means you're overconfident on things you're not good at.
That's hilarious. Somebody, the Dunning.
Is that called arrogance?
Yeah, it's called arrogance, but somebody mentioned this to me the other day. They call it phantom leadership, or somebody's gotten promoted and they have no business being there, and they're way overconfident, and they do,
Damn, that's never happened. So awesome. Thank you for your time. This has been another stellar episode with another expert around the country. So I'm sure we're going to get rave reviews on this one. So, yeah. So
thank you for inviting me on. I really appreciated the conversation.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Jen. That's it, folks. Another edition of Overcoming Distractions, the podcast, has come to an end. Hope you're inspired. Hope you've learned something. Check overcomingdistractions.com for more podcasts, video blogs, and up-to-date info on books and more books. We'll catch you on the next one.